The woman accused of posing as a 14-year-old and molesting multiple teenage boys will remain in jail until her trial.
Picture a TikTok profile. A girl says she's 14. She says she's homeschooled, that she doesn't get out much, that school for her looks different than it does for everyone else, that she's a little awkward but sweet. She posts the way a 14-year-old posts, a little self-conscious, a little performative. The lighting isn't perfect. The captions try too hard to sound casual. It's the kind of content that blends into a million other accounts belonging to actual young teenagers, scrolling past in the same feed, uploaded from the same bedrooms, filmed on the same cracked screen phones. Except she isn't 14, she's 22. For close to a year, a Tampa, Florida woman named Alyssa Zinger ran that exact persona across TikTok and Snapchat. And according to investigators, she didn't just fool other kids scrolling past her videos online. She used that fake identity to work her way into the actual lives of real middle school-aged boys, some as young as 12 in person. Not through the screen, past it. By the time Tampa police caught up to what was happening, they weren't looking at a strange internet prank that had gotten out of hand. They were looking at a criminal investigation into an adult accused of using a child's identity as a tool of access. This is the case of Alyssa Zinger, and it's a case that didn't end when she was arrested. It kept growing. More victims came forward, more charges were filed, and a courtroom moment would eventually strip away every layer of the persona she'd spent a year building, a judge, on the record, saying in plain terms exactly who the adult in the room actually was. If you're new here, this channel covers real cases like this one, pulled directly from court records and verified police reporting, not speculation, not rumor. If you want to follow how this case moves toward trial, subscribe, because as of the most recent filings, it still isn't finished. Here's what makes this case different from a lot of the ones we usually cover. Most of the online predator cases that make headlines involve an adult who never hides what they are. They lie about intent, but not usually about their entire identity, their age, their whole life story. This case is different because the deception itself was the entire operation. Every single interaction, every message, every video, every in-person meeting, all of it was built on top of one sustained lie that had to be maintained perfectly, every single day for almost a year, across multiple children at once. That's not a small detail. That's the thing that should actually worry you. Her name is Alyssa Zinger. At the time this case became public, she was 22 years old, living and working in Tampa, Florida, an ordinary-looking young adult with an ordinary routine, in an ordinary Tampa neighborhood. Nothing about her outward life suggested what investigators say was happening underneath it. According to the Tampa Police Department's own public statement on the case, Zinger made contact with a victim by posing online as a homeschooled student. The department's release describes her communicating with that victim, primarily through an online social media platform, language that, as the case widened in the following months, would come to cover both TikTok and Snapchat specifically. This wasn't framed by investigators as a single bad decision made in a moment of poor judgment. It was described, over the course of the investigation, as a pattern. An adult deliberately presenting herself as a young teenage girl for the specific purpose of building relationships with children she otherwise would have had no legitimate reason to be close to. The charges filed at the very first arrest were already serious. 2 felony counts of lewd or lascivious battery, 5 felony counts of lewd or lascivious molestation. The listed victim was between the ages of 12 and 15. Florida law draws a hard line around exactly this scenario. An adult, over the age of 18, engaging in prohibited conduct with a child in that early teen age range, regardless of whether the child believed the relationship was something else. It's worth sitting with that distinction for a second, because it's the entire foundation of why this case matters the way it does. A 12 to 15-year-old doesn't have the legal capacity to consent to this kind of relationship. Full stop, regardless of what they were told, regardless of what platform it happened on, regardless of who they believed they were talking to. The law isn't interested in whether a victim felt like they were in a real relationship. It's interested in the age gap and the deception that enabled it. Under Florida Statute 800.04, the crime of lewd or lascivious battery applies specifically to sexual activity involving a victim between 12 and 15 years old, committed by someone significantly older. And critically, Florida law does not recognize a defense of the victim consented, or the victim believed I was also a minor in these cases. The statute is built around the understanding that a child that age cannot meaningfully consent to a relationship with an adult, regardless of how that adult presented themselves. Each count is a second-degree felony on its own, punishable by up to 15 years in prison, which is part of why, once multiple counts across multiple victims started stacking, the total exposure in this case climbed as high as it did. This is also why the "she thought I was her age too" framing that sometimes comes up in cases like this one doesn't function as a legal defense in Florida. It might explain a victim's confusion. It does nothing to change the legal reality of who the adult in the situation was. And that was only the beginning of what investigators say they eventually found. Because a single victim, a single arrest, a single set of charges, that's not where this case stayed. To understand how something like this goes on for as long as it reportedly did, you have to understand what Zinger was actually building online. Because this wasn't a single fake photo or a lazily written bio that fell apart the moment someone asked a follow-up question. According to reporting on the case, she maintained an entire, sustained persona. A homeschooled 14-year-old girl, complete with the kind of small, specific details that make an online identity feel real to another teenager rather than obviously fabricated. Homeschooling did a lot of quiet work here. It explained why she wasn't posting from a specific school's hallway. It explained gaps in her schedule that a normal school day would otherwise account for. It gave her cover for not being independently known by classmates, teachers, or a school directory the way an enrolled student would be, because there was no school to check. She used two platforms that, together, cover most of how young teenagers actually communicate today, and the combination wasn't accidental. TikTok gave her discoverability. It's a platform built around an algorithm that surfaces content to strangers based on engagement, not existing social connections, which meant she didn't need to already know a victim to end up in their feed. TikTok was the front door, the public-facing proof that she existed as a normal kid, posting normal content, living a normal, if slightly isolated, homeschooled teenage life. Snapchat did the opposite job. It gave her privacy. It's a platform built around disappearing messages, designed from the ground up around the idea that conversations don't need to leave a permanent, easily discoverable trail. Once a connection moved from TikTok to Snapchat, it moved somewhere a parent glancing over a shoulder or scrolling through a phone later would have a much harder time reconstructing. Public platform to build the persona, private platform to build the relationship. That's not a coincidence. It's the exact structure that predatory contact on social media tends to follow, because it mirrors how legitimate teenage friendships form online too. The tactic works specifically because it's indistinguishable, on the surface, from completely normal behavior. Think about how many actual teenage friendships start this exact way in 2026. A comment on a video, a follow, a conversation that migrates from a public app to a private one, because that's just where kids actually talk to each other now. None of those individual steps look alarming from the outside. A parent scrolling through their child's TikTok following list isn't going to see anything that reads as dangerous, just another kid, posting the same content every other kid posts. That's precisely the gap this kind of deception is built to exploit. It doesn't need to look suspicious. It just needs to look ordinary. And there's a second layer to why this specific persona worked as long as it reportedly did. A homeschooled identity doesn't just explain gaps in a schedule. It also removes an entire category of people who might otherwise catch the lie. No classmates to run into her in a hallway. No teachers who'd notice she wasn't actually enrolled anywhere. No yearbook, no attendance record, no group chat full of kids who have known each other since elementary school and would immediately recognize a stranger claiming to be one of them. Homeschooling, used this way, isn't just a backstory detail. It's a built-in excuse for why almost no one in her victim's actual social circles would ever be positioned to verify she existed the way she claimed to. There's also the matter of age itself, and how hard it can genuinely be to judge from photos and video alone, especially footage shot and edited the way most short-form social content is. Lighting, camera angle, filters, and the specific visual language teenagers use when filming themselves all work together to compress the visible age gap between a 22-year-old and a 14-year-old far more than most people would assume. It's not that the deception was undetectable by nature. It's that the platforms themselves, built around short clips, heavy editing, and quick scrolling, aren't designed to reward the kind of careful, sustained scrutiny that might catch a detail like this. A single video, watched once, in a feed moving fast, is a very different thing than a photograph examined closely under good lighting. That gap between how content is made to be consumed and how carefully it would need to be studied to catch something like this is, in a lot of ways, the real vulnerability being exploited here, not any one person's failure to look closely enough. By the time Tampa police opened their investigation, this wasn't a dormant fake account sitting untouched in some corner of the internet. It was an identity that had been actively used to build what investigators describe as an inappropriate relationship with a victim between 12 and 15, not a one-time message exchange, but something sustained, something maintained over time, something that had clearly required ongoing effort to keep believable. And as detectives would go on to discover, that first documented victim wasn't an isolated case. He was the first thread investigators pulled, and pulling it led somewhere much larger. On November 24, 2023, Tampa police arrested Alyssa Zinger, then 22 years old, following tips that led detectives directly to her. According to the department's official statement, the investigation showed Zinger had made contact with a victim by posing as a homeschooled student online, communicating with him primarily through social media. Once detectives had enough to act, she was taken into custody and transported to Orient Road Jail, Hillsborough County's main booking and intake facility, located just outside downtown Tampa. The charges filed at that first arrest were substantial on their own, before anything else about the case had come to light. 2 felony counts of lewd or lascivious battery, 5 felony counts of lewd or lascivious molestation, the defendant listed as over 18, the victim listed as between 12 and 15 years old. At this stage, the case was already serious enough to draw coverage across Tampa Bay local news outlets. A 22-year-old woman, arrested for allegedly posing online as a young teenager in order to engage with a child roughly a decade younger than herself. On paper, in a lot of ways, this already reads like a case that could stand entirely on its own. A single, disturbing incident headed toward a single trial. And this is exactly where a lot of cases like this one end. One victim, one arrest, one set of charges moving in a straight line toward a plea or a trial date. If that had been the full scope of what happened here, this would still be a serious story, but it wouldn't be the story that eventually pulled national attention. It's worth noting how this first arrest reportedly came together, because it matters for understanding how investigations like this typically start. According to the department's statement, the case began with tips provided to detectives, meaning someone, somewhere, noticed something that didn't add up and decided to say something about it. That detail tends to get lost in a lot of true crime retellings, where the focus lands entirely on the offender. But almost every case like this one starts the same way. not with police proactively uncovering a hidden crime through surveillance, but with someone in the community, a parent, a friend, a sibling, sometimes the victim himself, deciding something felt wrong enough to report it. That's not what happened here. Because Zinger was released from custody on pre-trial release following that first arrest, a standard part of the legal process while a case moves toward trial. And that release did not end the investigation into her. If anything, it was the moment the investigation quietly kept building underneath the surface, while her case sat in the system waiting for its next hearing. Detectives kept working, and this part of the process is worth understanding too, because it's rarely as dramatic on the ground as it looks in a headline. Building a case like this typically means subpoenaing records from the platforms themselves. TikTok and Snapchat both maintain data that can be produced under a valid legal request, even on a platform built around messages that are designed to disappear from a user's own screen. It means interviewing the first victim in detail, asking careful, specific questions designed to surface names, dates, and other details that might point toward other potential victims. It means cross-referencing those details against school records, against other reports that may have come in independently, against anything that connects back to the same fabricated identity. None of that happens quickly, and none of it happens through a single confession or a single lucky break. It happens through the slow, methodical work of matching a pattern across multiple, separate accounts of what happened. And that's exactly what investigators say they found here. And what they found next is what turned this from a single, contained case into something with a much wider and more disturbing scope. Over the months following her first arrest, while out on pre-trial release, detectives say they identified 4 additional victims, ages 13 and 14. According to reporting from Fox 13 Tampa Bay and other outlets that followed the case, investigators found that Zinger had used the same method with each of these additional victims. The same homeschooled 14-year-old persona. The same platforms, TikTok to make contact, Snapchat to build the relationship privately. And according to the new allegations tied to this expanded investigation, she had engaged in sexual acts with each of these victims at different points throughout 2023, meaning that, according to the timeline investigators laid out, some of this alleged conduct with additional victims may have been happening concurrently with the relationship tied to her very first arrest. That detail matters because it reframes the entire shape of the case. This wasn't investigators uncovering one bad decision that happened to repeat itself in a single, isolated instance. What they described finding was closer to a sustained operation, multiple relationships, allegedly overlapping in time, each one built using the identical false identity, each one requiring her to maintain the same lie across multiple children simultaneously without any single one of them knowing about the others. Investigators also said there was video evidence connected to these additional counts, described in reporting as video evidence of multiple sexual acts involving Zinger and the minors. That evidence became central to the additional charges filed against her. That discovery led to a second arrest. According to Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office records, Zinger was arrested again in early April 2024, facing a significantly expanded set of charges beyond what she'd already been facing. Additional counts of lewd or lascivious molestation, additional counts of lewd or lascivious battery, sexual cyber harassment, and possession and in-state transmission of child pornography by electronic device. Stacked together, across both arrests, reporting on the case has cited Zinger as potentially facing well over 100 years in prison if convicted on the full scope of charges. Take a step back and look at what that number actually represents. It's not just a measure of the potential sentence, it's a measure of scale. 100+ years isn't the kind of exposure that comes from one bad relationship. It's what happens when a court is looking at a pattern spread across multiple children, multiple points of contact, and evidence that, according to prosecutors, didn't happen by accident or in a single lapse of judgment, but was built and repeated deliberately. This is the moment the story stopped being about one bad decision and became something else entirely. Not an aberration, a method, one that, according to investigators, had already been tested and refined before detectives ever caught up to it. There's also a detail worth flagging about the timeline itself, because it matters for how this case is understood. The additional victims weren't identified because Zinger came forward, or because she was confronted and admitted to more. They were identified because detectives kept working the case after her first arrest, meaning that, according to the timeline laid out in charging documents, she was allegedly continuing this same pattern with additional children while already facing prosecution for the first set of charges. If that timeline holds up through trial, it speaks directly to the argument prosecutors would go on to make at her bond hearing. That pre-trial release alone wasn't sufficient to stop the underlying pattern of behavior. And as the case moved toward its next major hearing, the people surrounding Zinger, not just her, but her family, were about to become part of the story too. When Tampa police searched the Zinger family home as part of the ongoing investigation, body camera footage, later shown in court, captured a detail that prosecutors would go on to argue was significant, not incidental. According to reporting on the case, officers were provided with a phone by Zinger's parents during the search, a device presented to police as belonging to Alyssa. Later analysis reportedly determined that this phone was actually her mother's old device, one that had not been used to make a call since 2021 and had never had any social media applications installed on it at all. Prosecutors pointed directly to this discrepancy in court, arguing it was relevant to a potential obstruction issue. The position being that this wasn't simply an innocent mix-up between two similar devices in a household, but the deliberate substitution of the wrong phone during a search directly connected to a criminal investigation into a family member. The family's public response to the broader case has also become part of the story surrounding it. Zinger's father, Josh Zinger, has spoken to media outlets defending his daughter, describing her instead as the victim of the situation rather than its architect. In comments to Fox News, he pointed to one of the boys involved in the case, saying that boy had harbored her in his home for roughly 5 months and had introduced her to friends at his school, framing his daughter's actions as something she was drawn into by others, rather than something she deliberately orchestrated herself. Zinger's defense attorney, Dana Hurst-Fulgera, has raised a related and separate argument in court proceedings, that Zinger has a documented history of emotional and developmental challenges, including an individualized education plan she was on throughout her time in school, and that this history is relevant context for how the case should be understood by the court. These are legitimate arguments for a defense team to raise, and it will ultimately be up to a court, not a YouTube video and not a comment section, to weigh how much they matter. But they sit in direct, unresolved tension with what prosecutors have argued in filings and hearings, that this was not a single lapse in judgment by someone who didn't fully understand what she was doing, but a sustained, repeated pattern that continued across multiple victims over the better part of a year, requiring ongoing planning and active concealment to maintain. It's also worth being precise about what an individualized education plan actually represents, because it gets invoked in cases like this one as shorthand for something far broader than what it typically documents. An IEP is a formal plan schools create for students who qualify for specialized educational support. It can cover a wide range of things, from learning disabilities to ADHD to speech and language needs to physical disabilities, and having one says very little on its own about a person's capacity to understand right from wrong, or their ability to plan and sustain a deception over time. It's a real, relevant piece of a person's history. But it's not by itself, evidence of the kind of profound cognitive impairment that would be needed to meaningfully undercut a case built on this many months of consistent, adaptive behavior, which is precisely the argument prosecutors have made in response to it. That tension between a family describing a victim and a prosecution describing a pattern didn't stay outside the courtroom for long. It came to a head directly in front of a judge. It's also worth pausing on why this particular dynamic, a family rallying around a defendant rather than around the idea of accountability, shows up as often as it does in cases like this one. It's rarely because a family doesn't love the person involved. It's usually because reframing a defendant as the real victim is, psychologically, a far easier story to hold onto than the alternative. Believing your daughter deliberately built and maintained a fake identity to access children for the better part of a year is an enormously difficult thing for a parent to sit with. Believing instead that she was manipulated, or that her documented developmental history explains it away entirely, is a version of events a family can live inside more comfortably. That doesn't make the developmental history argument false. A court is still obligated to weigh it seriously. But it's worth understanding why a family's account and a prosecution's account can diverge this sharply without either side necessarily being dishonest about what they believe. On April 9, 2024, Alyssa Zinger appeared in a Tampa courtroom for a bond hearing tied to her most recent charges. Presiding over the hearing was Judge Laura Ward. According to reporting on the hearing, prosecutors argued that Zinger posed an ongoing risk to the community and that the evidence gathered, including video evidence connected to multiple victims, supported keeping her in custody rather than releasing her while the case moved toward trial. Their position was straightforward. This wasn't a person accused of a single, contained incident. This was someone accused of a sustained pattern involving several children, with physical evidence tying her to more than one of them. The defense pushed back. Attorney Dana Hurst-Fulgera raised Zinger's developmental history again, and separately disputed that Zinger herself was the one responsible for filming the video evidence at the center of some of the charges, an argument aimed at separating her from at least part of what prosecutors were presenting. Judge Ward's response to the proceedings became the most widely reported moment to come out of this case, and it's worth understanding exactly what she said and why it landed the way it did. According to Local 10 and Fox News coverage of the hearing, Judge Ward addressed Zinger directly, telling her, "The problem is you are in multiple videos with young boys 13 and 14 years old. You are an adult. You are manipulating, taking advantage of these young boys." That single sentence cuts through everything the case had up to that point been dressed up in. Not the persona, not the platform mechanics, not the family's framing of her as fragile or misled. Just the fact the entire case had always rested on an age gap and a deliberate deception used to bridge it. She went further, according to Fox News, reporting on the hearing, telling Zinger plainly that she didn't seem to grasp the severity of what she had done, and that regardless of who had actually held the camera in any of the videos at issue, the responsibility didn't shift. You are the only adult. That line directly answers the defense's argument about who filmed what. It doesn't matter, in the judge's framing, who pressed record. There was exactly one adult present in every version of this case, across every victim, across every platform, and Florida law doesn't distribute responsibility for that gap based on who was holding a phone. Judge Ward also addressed the family directly, specifically over the phone discrepancy uncovered during the search. According to reporting, she told the court she could not understand a family helping a defendant to the extent that it interferes with a criminal investigation, and to the extent that it helps you evade accountability and responsibility. That comment mattered for a second reason beyond the immediate hearing. It signaled that the court wasn't just weighing Zinger's own conduct in isolation. It was weighing the environment around her, including whether people close to her had actively worked to slow down or complicate the investigation itself. Bond hearings like this one aren't about determining guilt. That's what a trial is for. A bond hearing is narrower. A judge deciding whether releasing a defendant back into the community, while the case is pending, poses an unacceptable risk. That's a lower bar than proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's why a judge can speak as directly as Judge Ward did here without that being the final word on Zinger's guilt or innocence at trial. What it does represent is a judge, weighing the totality of the evidence presented at that stage, concluding that the risk of releasing her outweighed her right to pretrial freedom, a conclusion serious enough on its own, even before a single count has gone to a jury. At the conclusion of the hearing, Judge Ward denied bond. Zinger remained in custody. For a case built almost entirely on secrecy, a fabricated identity, private disappearing messages, a family narrative constructed around protecting her from consequences, that courtroom moment stripped all of it away in real time. Not through some dramatic reveal or gotcha moment. Just through a judge, on the record, stating plainly what the case had always actually been about underneath every layer of persona and platform. An adult, using a child's identity to gain access to real children. As of the most recent reporting on this case, Alyssa Zinger remains in custody without bond, held in Hillsborough County, while the case moves toward trial on the full scope of charges from both her November 2023 and April 2024 arrests, charges spanning lewd and lascivious battery, lewd and lascivious molestation, sexual cyber harassment, and possession and transmission of child pornography. Her defense continues to argue that her developmental history and emotional challenges are central to understanding what happened, and that context matters when evaluating her level of culpability. Her father continues to publicly describe her as a victim of the situation rather than its architect, pointing to the boy who introduced her around as someone who bears responsibility of his own. And prosecutors continue building a case around what they describe as clear, repeated, and deliberate conduct, sustained across multiple children over an extended period of time. Conduct, they argue, was concealed, not stumbled into. None of those threads have been fully resolved yet. This is not a case with a tidy, closed ending. It's a case still actively working its way through the Hillsborough County court system, with a trial date still ahead of it. Whatever verdict eventually comes out of that trial, it will be the result of a full evidentiary process, not a comment section, not a TikTok explainer, and not this video. It's also worth stepping back and asking why a case like this one resonates as widely as it has. Part of it is the gender reversal. Most of the online predator cases that dominate headlines and true crime coverage involve male offenders, which makes a case built around a female offender using an almost identical playbook stand out, both to viewers and, frankly, to investigators building the case itself. Part of it is the platforms involved. TikTok and Snapchat aren't fringe apps used by a small subset of teenagers. They're two of the most heavily used platforms among exactly the age group targeted here, which means the mechanics of this case are directly relevant to an enormous number of families, not a narrow-edge case. And part of it is simply the duration. A persona doesn't survive for the better part of a year, across multiple relationships, by accident. It survives because it was built carefully and maintained deliberately, and that's a harder thing to look away from than a single reckless decision made in one bad night. What is already firmly on the public record, though, is this. An adult who, according to investigators, spent close to a year building and maintaining the identity of a 14-year-old girl. Specifically, prosecutors argue, to gain access to children barely old enough to be in middle school. And a courtroom moment where, for the first time, someone in a formal position of authority said out loud, on the record, exactly what that persona had always been built to obscure. She played 14 online for the better part of a year, in front of Judge Laura Ward, in a Hillsborough County courtroom. That performance finally ran out of room. Cases like this one tend to leave people with the same uncomfortable question afterward. How do you actually protect a kid from something built specifically to look ordinary? There isn't a clean answer, but there are a few things worth knowing. First, age on a profile means almost nothing. It's self-reported, unverified, and in a case like this one, it was the entire lie. Second, a platform migration pattern is worth paying attention to. A friendship that starts somewhere public and quickly moves to a disappearing message app is a pattern worth at least asking a question about. Not because every instance of it is dangerous, but because it's specifically the structure that makes this kind of deception harder to catch. And third, homeschooling, moving, or any story that conveniently explains why a new friend has no shared connections anyone can verify is worth treating as a detail to gently confirm, not just accept. None of that guarantees anything. This case shows that even attentive adults, a boy's own family who reportedly welcomed her into their home for months, believing her to be their son's friend, can be fooled by a persona built well enough. That's an uncomfortable thing to sit with, because it means this isn't a story about careless parents or oblivious kids. It's a story about how thin the line has become between a completely normal online friendship and something engineered to look exactly like one. Knowing the pattern doesn't eliminate that risk, but it's still the first, most practical step toward recognizing it earlier the next time it shows up somewhere else. If this case updates, a trial date, a plea, a verdict, we'll be covering it. Subscribe if you want that update the moment it happens.